This is a UK politics podcast, but we can't start our discussion without talking about the incredible news that's going on in the United States. Now, we're all watching the fallout from the US election, and some of what we're seeing is remarkable. Now, Donald Trump is threatening legal action to stop counts in some states. Members of his team are saying there's been fraud or the Democrats have cheated. As someone who's a friend of Donald Trump's, are you surprised by this?
I'm not surprised that he's fighting with everything he's got to try and avoid getting unseated. I think that he made some very stupid and reckless remarks yesterday from the White House about stopping the voting. Clearly, Republicans have moved quite quickly to stress he was talking about, corruption, but there's no evidence at the moment of there being any corruption with the ballot system or the voting. All there is a lot of votes. We're seeing a tremendous turnout in this election. Joe Biden's got the record turnout ever by any presidential candidate, but Donald Trump's likely to end up as the second highest. So it's in a remarkable situation. You can see it either way. I mean, at the moment, I'd say Biden will win, but it may take quite a long time to unravel.
You spoke to him, Donald Trump, this is, fairly recently. You've known him for a number of years. If you were to speak to him today or tomorrow or in the coming days, what exactly would you be saying to the current US president?
Well, I'd say you've got to be mindful of the potential here for a lot of civil unrest if you keep stoking the fire of saying you've had the election stolen from you. You can't say that unless there's actual evidence that it has been stolen. And at the moment, there's no evidence other than a very slow, steady, systematic counting of legally cast votes. That's what the American democratic system is based on. So I think this rhetoric of it's being stolen, I'm being cheated, it's all to try and save face if he loses, but it's also risking quite incendiary reaction from his supporters. And we saw a very ugly scene developing in the early hours outside an Arizona vote counting center, where people turned up with semi-automatic rifles and began intimidating the people doing the counting. That is outrageous.
Do you think that's something he thinks about? I mean, you've known him for a number of years. You're clearly having that thought process. You're thinking, hold on, if you say these sort of things, these are the sort of reactions you're going to get. Do you think he's going through that thought process of thinking, if I say this, this is what the potential consequence might be?
No, I think Donald Trump's only focus right now is not losing. This is a man who's pathologically allergic to the concept of losing. His whole brand is predicated on winning. And he did win last time by a very small margin, and he might lose this time by an equally small margin. So I've got no problem with Trump trying to avoid defeat legitimately. But where he starts to make false claims about being cheated or it being stolen, and it whips up anger on the streets, then I have a big problem.
Your view of Donald Trump, from my perspective anyway, has been fairly nuanced over the last 4 years. You've obviously been friends with him, you were on The Apprentice with him, you've been supportive of some of the things he's done, but at the same time there have been periods where you have been fairly critical. There was a period where I think he might have unfollowed you because of something that you said. On the whole, do you regret supporting someone who at the moment appears to be stoking civil unrest?
Well, no, because I've never endorsed Trump as a candidate. I've always said I personally wouldn't vote for him. He's not my politics at all. But I have got this long-time friendship with him. I like him personally. I've always known the kind of character he is, but he's an interesting character in many ways. And if you'd asked me back in January, would he win the election? I would have said comfortably. He was doing pretty well with the economy. On the foreign stage, he hadn't declared war anywhere.
What do you think's gone wrong?
Sorry?
What do you think's gone wrong?
I think two things went wrong. The pandemic changed everything, and then we had the George Floyd killing and the protests that followed that. And in both cases, Trump has failed to rise to the challenge of being America's leader and to the comforter in chief. He's shown zero empathy to anybody in either of those two huge seismic incidents. And I think as a result, he's in the perilous position he's in now, where he may well get voted out of office.
Away from US politics, onto what we normally talk about on this podcast, which is the situation here in the United Kingdom. Again, you've been very critical of the government. You're on Good Morning Britain. You've got a bit of a reputation for hard-hitting interviews. We know that ministers haven't gone on your programme for quite a period of time. We're about to go into lockdown now. Do you think that was the right call? Do you think it happened at the right time? What's been your take on everything we've seen in the last week or so? Because it's been an interesting time. We've had that press conference on the Saturday, which sort of came as a bit of a surprise to many. Boris Johnson sort of rushed this out because of the leaks into the media. You've been analysing it. What are your thoughts?
I think it's too late. I think that we'll see that in the number of hospitalizations and deaths, sadly, in the next 2 to 3 weeks. He should have done it when the SAGE committee advised him to do it back at the end of September, but he dithered and delayed, as he did back in March, April. Boris Johnson has been found wanting as a leader when we face this enormous challenge as a country. And I think he has a very mediocre cabinet. The reason they don't want to come on Good Morning Britain is because we hold them to account ferociously. And I make no apology for that. But we haven't seen them now for about 190 days. I mean, it's preposterous. A complete dereliction of their democratic duty to come on shows like ours and to be held to account for decisions that affect millions of people, including our viewers. So I think it's cowardly. It's pathetic, but I understand why they want to duck us, because I would be all over them right now about the constant mixed messaging, the U-turns, the dithering, the delay, the lack of clarity, which I think, whatever side of the political divide you're on, right now, everybody thinks the government has been getting this wrong.
The argument from the government, I'm going to play devil's advocate, and what the government would say is they get this advice from scientists, they weigh up the advice, they're guided by the science, that's a phrase they've used repeatedly, and they then balance business interests, economic interests, mental health interests, and they weigh up all the different aspects of how we run a functioning society and then make a decision. That would be their response to why they didn't go sooner. What would you say to that?
Well, it's demonstrably untrue. 2 weeks ago, Boris Johnson was mocking Keir Starmer for suggesting a 2 to 3 week circuit breaker and make out all you want is a national lockdown, which would be a disaster. And then within 12 days, he's ordered it for the country. That's not leadership. That's a pathetic flip flop on a massively important issue. But he made the wrong call. And the question is, how many more people will die in the next few weeks because Boris Johnson didn't do what his scientists told him to do, didn't do what Keir Starmer urged him to do, and didn't do what people like me were urging him to do, because the point of a lockdown is to suppress the virus when it gets out of control. That virus is now out of control again. And I'm afraid we're going to reap, I fear, a whirlwind in the next few weeks, which will be as bad as what we saw in March, April.
If you were in number 10, if you were Prime Minister, what would you do differently to what Boris Johnson has done? What would be the stark difference in the response? Because at the moment it seems to be that you seem to be thinking that Boris Johnson just does things a few weeks too late. Is that what the problem is here?
He doesn't make decisions. He's too worried about pleasing people. You can't lead the country in a pandemic and please everybody. You've got to level with the public and be completely honest and transparent about what needs to be done and why we need to do it, and back it up with transparency and showing the data that makes sense. And what Boris Johnson has done all year since the start of all this is show complacency, dithering, delay, mixed messaging, and U-turns, whether it's the calamitous start where we had way too late to lock down, which cost maybe 25,000 lives. We allowed the Cheltenham Festival to continue, the football matches when it was at its most toxic, the virus at that time, which was complete madness. We let 20 million people fly in over those months, many from corona-ravaged countries. We had no PPE, we had no ventilators. We had the quarantine fiasco through the summer, which again, loads of U-turns, not making any sense. We had the schools fiasco. On almost every single litmus test of this pandemic, of this challenge to the government, they have failed. And the same people that made all those bad decisions are still the ones in charge now, continuing, in my opinion, to make bad decisions.
They again, I'm going to play devil's advocate. They would argue that those U-turns are because they're being reactive. It's good governance. I mean, I've interviewed several cabinet ministers. I've interviewed the Prime Minister over the last month or so, and whenever I've said, look, you keep changing your mind, there are U-turn after U-turn, and their response every single time is that as the data changes, as the situation changes, we are changing our decisions because that's good government. What would you say to that?
It's simply not true, is it? Otherwise, they'd have taken the decision of the scientists, who they now say they're guided by, but for months said they were following. Well, which one is it? One is you do what they tell you, and you then pass the buck to the scientists. The second one is you listen to them and then maybe do the complete opposite. Either way, you have to be accountable for what you do. Boris Johnson's great talent is in avoiding personal accountability. That's why he doesn't do many interviews, and certainly not on programmes like Good Morning Britain, because you get a hard time and be made to justify some of these decisions he's been taking, or rather not been taking. I fear we've locked down too late. Finally, we've reached a point of clarity of a national lockdown that at least has a benefit of making sense, because it's 4 weeks and hopefully it'll reduce the R rate to a level we can have a reasonably normal few months afterwards. But we're in this pandemic for at least 2 years, in my opinion. That's the timescale of the last pandemic. It's likely it'll be the same again now before we get a successful vaccine, or before we get drugs that can stop people dying. And what we need is calm authority and leadership of the kind we've seen from Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, or Angela Merkel in Germany, or as you've seen in South Korea or Taiwan or Vietnam, or any of the many of the Eastern and Asian countries who've done fantastically well in suppressing the virus, either through having a genuinely world-class testing system, or by having lockdowns that they use in a very draconian, firm and immediate way, which work. We've done none of these things.
Piers, a couple more questions before we let you get on. You've been involved in journalism for a really long period of time. You're the editor of the News of the World, editor of the Daily Mirror. You've seen successive governments come and go during your time as a journalist. Looking back, from your professional lifetime, which Prime Minister do you think would be best placed to be in number 10 right now?
I think a combination of probably Maggie Thatcher, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. All had rather different styles and abilities. But, Blair is very good at simplifying all the decision-making to sensible bullet points. And we can hear him do that at the moment, really distilling a complex issue to solutions. Brown is fantastic on the detail. And we saw that in the 2008 financial crisis, where he basically saved this country from complete financial disaster. I think he'd be very good on the detail because it is complicated. And Maggie Thatcher is, to me, somebody, whether you loved her or hated her, was a proper leader who wouldn't care about whether people liked her or not, wouldn't care about being mispopular. She would simply care about making the right decision and then going all in. And I think that the problem with Boris Johnson is he's never done that. He doesn't go all in. He dithers, he delays, he waits, he listens to the way the wind's blowing. He's done it his whole career as a politician, but it doesn't work with a virus.
Before you go, I just want to talk to you about your book very quickly, Wake Up. It goes through why you think there's a liberal attack on free speech, and you're quite critical of cancel culture. What was the motivation behind writing the book? And I'm quite interested by how the pandemic has affected that, because I've read passages of it. It's in diary form. Was that always the plan? What did the pandemic do to change the way in which you've written this book and your outlook on it?
Well, it wasn't supposed to be a diary. I started writing it a few weeks before the pandemic started. But then it made more sense to me to do it in real time, because I think the pandemic is an extraordinary time in history, and I've been a diarist for many years, and it seemed to make sense to play to my strengths as a diarist, but also because all the things I was going to talk about in my book, about woke culture, cancel culture, this kind of new illiberal, liberal fascism, which is built up, I felt were being explored in real time throughout the months of February, March, April, May, and so on. And in a way, it exacerbated what was going on before the pandemic and shone a really bright light on this culture and how insidious it's become, because we're supposed to be a liberal democracy in this country. We're supposed to believe in freedom of speech, freedom of expression. But there's a small, very noisy group of these illiberal fascists on social media who seem to think their primary function in life is to order the rest of us how to think, how to act, how to what jokes we can find funny, what TV or movies we can watch, how we should have our hair, what we should eat, what we should drink. And it's got completely ridiculous. And we saw through the summer this extend to attacking statues of Winston Churchill, of Nelson Mandela, of the presidents in America, debates on the radio about whether chess is racist and so on, all complete nonsense and all clouding the really important issues of social and racial injustice. So my book is really a clarion call to the woke crowd to say, surely the pandemic has taught us the value of freedom, and the freedom of speech should be paramount in any democracy. You've got to learn how to let people have a different view to you without thinking the only way to deal with that is to cancel them.
And it's a brilliant read for anyone who hasn't read it already. Piers, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure. Good talking to you. All the best.